Hi, I'm Greg Braun, Executive Director of the Guardians of Martin County, and welcome to this next in our series of podcasts. We've been doing this for about a year and have been working with a variety of the entities that we collaborate with. Several of those have been focused on water quality kinds of things. So we talked with Eve Samples from the Friends of the Everglades and Mark Perry from the Florida Oceanographic Society. And so we're very pleased this time to have Jim Moir, the Indian Riverkeeper, as our guest. Jim's been in this role for a couple of years, and we're glad that he's going to join us today and tell us a little bit about what the Riverkeeper does overall, and many of the organizations that the Riverkeeper collaborates with. We'll talk a little bit about some of the flora and fauna of the Indian River Lagoon as well. And part of the reason that the Guardians have had so many of these about water and water quality is certainly that the quality of life in Martin County is intrinsically linked to the quality of the Indian River Lagoon and the St. Lucie Estuary. So all these different organizations are helping to try to either maintain or enhance the quality of the lagoon. So we're very pleased that Jim's taking some time today to talk with us. So Jim Moir, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start getting into the Indian River Lagoon.
Thank you, Greg. I'm very honored to spend some time with you. I am delighted to be able to speak to the Guardians. I value the Guardians' relationship with Martin County and the Indian River Lagoon and the St. Lucie Estuary incredibly. I think that you all have done really good work at protecting those environmental issues that we all care so much about. I moved to Martin County in 1992. I sort of became more civically aware and engaged in the early 2000s. I've been a local planning agency representative since 2002. Along about 25 years ago, I sort of took a departure in my life and started doing sort of ocean science facilitation, if for lack of a better word. Basically, I ran a research vessel, and we partnered with a lot of ocean science projects, most of them sort of in their early stages of development. And that sort of brought me to a better, clearer understanding of the importance and the rareness of our Indian River Lagoon and our St. Lucie Estuary. I'm proud and honored to be a board member of the Marine Resources Council, as well as the Rivers Coalition and the IRL National Estuary Program. And I think that they're all connected in very sort of intricate ways. I have enjoyed doing exotic invasive removal. I've enjoyed doing shoreline restoration and seagrass planting. And I think that we all can do the hands-on stuff as well as doing the legislative stuff. I think that it all is connected. Does that answer your question, Greg?
Yes, it does. And that does take me back. I think the first time you and I worked together closely was on a invasive species removal project on some Audubon properties on the South Fork. That was probably, I don't know, 15 years ago or something
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
right. I think it was probably like 2006 or 7.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's I think
could
about the
be.
amount of herbicides that have been applied to Brazilian pepper and wonder what we're doing.
Well, I think we can both take a little bit of comfort in the way that the state of Florida, through the IFAS program, is developing more and more biological controls.
Yeah.
I think they've done it well with the air potato and some of the other species, Melaleuca as well. So I think you're right. If we can move towards less chemicals, that's going to be better for the environment overall.
Yeah, I've just been working with a Brazilian pepper thrip that has some really good potential for, reducing it won't do much about seed stock and what's on the ground, but it will certainly reduce the healthy Brazilian peppers that are producing those seeds.
Yeah, yeah. It's always going to be a challenge because of the way the birds spread the seeds from
Yeah.
so many of the different invasive plants. But once we get the majority of the work done, it's a lot easier just to keep things on a kind of a maintenance program.
Yeah. And
So you spend
I'm sorry, go ahead.
you spend a fair amount of time on the water as well. So the lagoon is what 156 miles in length, and you're the one and only river keeper. So tell us a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I'm actually the one and only Indian Riverkeeper. There are 15 other water keepers in the state of Florida, of various sizes. I mean, the Miami Keeper and the St. John's Keeper are really big organizations. The Tampa Bay Keeper is also really large, and the Suncoast Keeper is pretty big as well. My range is from the Loxahatchee River or Jupiter, Florida, up to the Halifax River, say New Smyrna Beach, Daytona, Florida. So about 156 miles along the central east coast of Florida, including Treasure Coast and Space Coast.
Yeah, so we're way down here at the south end of the whole lagoon system. And certainly the focus on water quality in our area is just the overwhelming effects from the Lake Okeechobee discharges. And certainly through SERP and the C44 reservoir and other things like that, we're trying to address those water quality kinds of issues. But aren't there other different water quality challenges in different parts of the lagoon?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's it's one of the hazards of this sort of compartmentalizing of different municipalities along the Indian River Lagoon. And that is that, the issues become sort of magnified and perhaps even myopically focused on in those areas. And so we who live in the Stewart Martin County area have correctly been focused on Lake Okeechobee discharges and the effects around the St. Lucie Estuary. But those effects really are probably most easily measured within about 10 miles of the St. Lucie River. So once we get, sort of north Martin County, southern St. Lucie County, the Fort Pierce Inlet starts to take a more dramatic sort of influence and flushing effect on the Indian River Lagoon. And so by the time you're at Bear Point, for instance, most of the water quality issues within the lagoon are being affected by the flushing effects of the Fort Pierce Inlet. Further north, there are other inlets. The Sebastian is next, and so the flushing influences of the Sebastian Inlet, affect the water quality as it's being influenced by the St. Sebastian River. The St. Sebastian River has a watershed that nearly meets the St. John's watershed, and so these agricultural and now urban developments that are happening in Fellsmere and in St. Lucie County and in Vero Beach have dramatic influence on the Indian River Lagoon proximate to those inlets as well as the outlets from the tributaries. As you get further north in the Indian River Lagoon, where there are fewer inlets to the ocean, there's less exchange and there's a more prolonged residence time of both toxicants as well as low water quality. And so if something bad happens, if there is an algae bloom in the lagoon, in the northern Indian River Lagoon, it's likely to have a more persistent negative effect. As you know, the exchange of the turbidity, for one, is one of those things that really impedes the growth of seagrasses. And so we may see seagrass recovering in the southern end of the Indian River Lagoon, although kind of mysteriously, we aren't seeing that recovery south of the St. Lucie inlet, and we're really not clear why. But in the Sailfish Flats area, we are seeing good seagrass recovery. In the Mosquito Lagoon, where there is better flushing, we're seeing pretty good seagrass recovery. And I think that what we're probably noticing is that seagrasses require not only a fragmentation replanting or sort of grafting from themselves, or seed stock. And so we mentioned a little bit about seed stock and Brazilian pepper. But if there's no seed stock, there's likely to not be a very good recovery for that vegetative material. And so we also need to have, these are flowering plants, and so we need to have pollinators. And we've discovered that there are polychaetes, or little hairy worms, that do a pretty good job of pollinating seagrass. And so we need to be aware that it's not just about water quality. It's not just about flushing. It's not just about the nutrients that we're inputting. It's about everything. It's about having a good, healthy ecosystem. And sometimes if we are strictly worried about sort of the empirical quality of water as it's measured in water chemistry, we may be missing some of the important pieces, like what is the health of the soil? What is the health of what biologists call the benthic infaunal community, or the stuff that live in the sand? It's almost always the small stuff that gets overlooked that has the biggest, most dramatic effect on the habitat health. With a lack of manatees, I try to think of manatees as being sort of like the bison of the lagoon or of the estuary system. They graze the grasses, they transport seeds, they provide, without human inputs, a very important supply or supply of nutrients. There are fish that do the same. I mean, the mullet schools in the lagoon used to carry nutrients from the mangrove swamps into the seagrass beds and back and forth. And so as we've developed these urban areas along the Indian River Lagoon, we've changed the nutrient transport systems up and down the lagoon, as well as the flow structures up and down the lagoon, as we've created causeways that have segmented the Indian River Lagoon. We've created, sort of impediments to flow. If there's not an inlet nearby, there's very little tidal exchange in that section of the lagoon. For instance, up around Melbourne, there's maybe an inch of tidal fluctuation between high and low tide. Compare that to, nearly 2 feet here. So it's a dramatically complex and dynamic lagoon that has been changing for the 7,000 years it's existed. It's had many, many inlets that have been sort of somewhat ephemeral. It's had several tributaries, but also, most importantly, we've changed the drainage patterns in the state of Florida incredibly. I mean, by hundreds of percents.
I was interested to hear you say that seagrasses are not recovering as well down near the Jupiter Inlet. I'm kind of surprised at that, because I think of our inlets here at the south, Jupiter and St. Lucie, because of the proximity to the Gulf Stream, us having much more clear water. And my thinking is that that's the limiting factor for seagrasses. But is that not really the case?
I think that's true, but I think one of the things that we forget is there's a longshore current that holds the sediments and the discharges from the St. Lucie Basin to the south. And so, for instance, I live in Rocky Point, and so we have a dirty water plume that hugs the south shoreline of the St. Lucie, between Sewell's Point and Rocky Point. And so that turbid, sediment-filled water, I think, is preventing some of the sunlight from getting to the seagrasses at the Gomez through Hobe Sound area. I also think that, some of the basin runoff is not as clean, not necessarily toxic, but not as clear in terms of turbidity or ability for light to penetrate as we'd like. Plus, we had some dredging operations and some beach renourishing operations that stirred up sediment. There's an enormous amount of boat traffic that moves through, and so I think one of the things that you mentioned about the Jensen Beach Causeway is that we have a deeper channel through the middle as well, and so there is more sort of volume moving through that deeper channel as well. The Intercoastal Waterway has pretty dramatically changed the way flow happens north and south in the Indian River Lagoon as well. And I think that we often sort of underestimate the impacts of dredging operations. I think that there are differences between navigational dredging operations and environmental muck removal projects in terms of what the beneficial impacts to the lagoon might be.
Yeah, good point, Jim. And when you mentioned that, certainly one of the goals of the Rivers Coalition is ultimately to get a lot of that muck out of the same.
Yeah. Yeah, the IRL South project proposes, 9 million cubic yards of muck removal, which will do a lot. I think that we need to understand what we're going to do with that muck. The Brevard County Sorrel muck removal project has removed quite a lot of muck with some pretty high technology muck disposal proposals. But once the muck is saturated with salts from this contact in the estuary, it's difficult to turn it into an agricultural amendment. What we do with that muck is going to be a challenge. How we do no harm is going to be a real technological challenge.
Let's move the conversation, Jim, to some of the flora and fauna in the lagoon. Have you been engaged in any manatee rescues or anything like that?
Well, I guess before May, I was involved with 27 manatee necropsies. I volunteer with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, and we, regularly engage in manatee rescues, but we as often, or probably more often, unfortunately, deal with carcass retrieval as well as trying to figure out why those animals died. There are some sort of troubling issues. There haven't been as many emaciated animals. They are finding forage to survive. The boat strike issues are still a major problem for the species. I think that we're discovering other sort of troubling digestive tract issues. It probably is related to different qualities or species of macroalgae that they're consuming. mostly south of here, Dade and Broward County, as well as Palm Beach County. Haven't done a whale rescue or a dolphin intervention recently, within about 9 months. I've been working with sort of the recovery or attempted recovery of the possum pipefish up in Indian River County. So we're doing some stream side restorations, trying to get smartweed replanted on those shore banks where either exotic invasives have dominated or the management districts have used herbicides to control the stream banks and some of that natural habitat for the possum pipefish, as well as several other goby species, have been changed. Often they'll put rock in, which is not as good a habitat for some of these dark water, rare, endemic, native, endangered species. Getting them, accepted as a endangered species has been a bit of a challenge as well. So we're working on the possum pipefish, although I think the bigmouth sleeper and the velvet eel and the mountain mullet and the sword spine snook and several other of these fairly rare, endemic, and endangered species that are here are really, a compelling project, and I look forward to continuing to work with, some of my real heroes like Grant Gilmore and some of these other fish experts that understand what a healthy Indian River lagoon used to be. We have, in the last 130 years, changed this lagoon dramatically. It deservedly is considered, one of the most biodiverse estuaries in North America. And it is because of its sort of unique and kind of elegant geographical sort of placement in the universe that it has that incredible diversity. And in my estimation, it is the treasure of the Treasure Coast, that we've got, this incredible wealth of diversity. But as we have pushed this system more into sort of a eutrophic nutrient system, we've made it very difficult for that incredible diversity to exist. I think that we are seeing a shift, maybe a tropic shift, to more pollution tolerant species than filling every possible niche with different species.
Yeah. Jim, I've been hearing reports of people seeing more sawfish recently than in previous years or decades. Is that just we're hearing about it more, or do you see them and hear about it as well?
So 5, 6 months ago, we caught a sawfish just off the Rocky Point. It was a big one. There have been some juveniles, 4 foot-ish, including their bill, caught, north of the Jensen Beach Causeway. I think that, historically they definitely spawned here, and so it was an important piece of their habitat. I think there are probably more still in the Florida Bay, Thousand Islands range, but they've had some issues with algae and toxins in those algae as well. I suspect that without nets in the water, we're gonna see a recovery of that species. They're a magnificent, very interesting, cool fish, or ray, however you want to think of it. But they are really interesting, and I'm very excited that they are coming back. But we need to be careful about the health of the soils. Without some of the crustacea that live on the seagrasses and on the healthy soils, the sandy soils, not the muck, clayey or fine-grained soils, they'll have a really hard time. And without access into the mangrove marshes, they may have a hard time as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the sawfish are one of the species we're hearing more about. And I was very pleased that a few years ago we started having roseate spoonbills nest
Yeah,
on Bird Island there in
yeah,
Martin County. And I think we're to the point now where some of the youngsters that had fledged there are now old enough to be coming back to that location to nest. Any other observations of good bird life?
well, I think that what the spoonbills seem to be migrating back out of the Everglades, and so they're spreading their populations north and east again, which is fantastic. I have not seen any flamingos recently, um, although up in Titusville they're there, and so I've seen a few fly through over the last couple of years. But I think that we're seeing, a shift north. It's possibly related to climate change. It's also possibly related to rehydrating the Everglades. Um, Having wood storks in virtually every drainage canal that leads into the lagoon is really a terrific sign of recovery. Um, there's the spoonbills are just magnificent. I don't think I've been to Bird Island recently where I haven't seen a spoonbill, on the island. It's I think a really good story of recovery and change. And I think that sometimes the reasons for that change are masked by a what we call recovery, but it may be that the exotic invasive fish species that are now sort of dominating those systems may be a more convenient food resource for them. Um, it seems like cichlids are pretty much everywhere. And it may be that in those drainage ditches where they're feeding more without having the amphibians that they might have gone for previously, they're using cichlids and other easier prey.
Yeah,
Hard to know.
that's an interesting observation. Certainly, we see wood storks frequently along Bridge Road in the area where we're trying to do the
Yeah.
Lucie Headwaters project, or trying to restore some of those wetlands. And I'm sure it's the wood storks that nest on Bird Island that are flying to the
Yeah.
Bridge Road area wetlands to get prey to take back to their young.
Yeah. And watching them, carry whole branches of tree with them, it's a glorious sight. Those are just crazy big birds.
Yeah, and we're also pleased that there are a number of bald eagles nesting along the lagoon, so we
Yeah.
see them occasionally as well.
Yeah, and lots of pelicans. I mean, when when we think about recovery of species, these bird species are really sort of emblematic, even though the challenges are dramatic for them. But also, I think these species that are able to shift their food resources from one sort of dominant group to another are are going to make this move. And I think that climate change is something that really is having an impact on the migratory birds in particular. It really concerns me that Merritt Island may be the next place of major concern for migratory bird species, and I'm not sure how a, a much greater increased traffic for the space industry on Merritt Island is going to affect those migratory bird species.
Yeah, yeah. That discussion about birds, though, reminded me of one other aquatic species that I've been pleased to see a couple of queen conch in the St.
Yeah.
Lucie Inlet area. is do you see some as well?
Yeah, and I think that in the St. Lucie Estuary, almost every grass flat you walk on nowadays, you'll find some queen conch. There are some other competing exotic species that are a little concernful, and I don't know whether these queen conch are coming from the aquaculture program at Harbor Branch. I suspect that it's a bit of both, but they definitely are showing a comeback, and they are a welcome visitor or resident to the lagoon. One of the things that I think that sort of illuminates this discussion about the the diversity of species here and the more resilient species versus the ones that we sort of rely on. I was thinking the other day about the meiofauna, or the tube worms, and there was a time when we had a huge diversity of species of meiofauna in the St. Lucie estuary. And about 12 years ago, a paper was written where we'd lost about 87% of the diversity in that community. And I think that points out how we really aren't aware of the non-charismatic species that live in these estuaries, and how important those species really are to not only the diversity of the system but also its resilience. And so if we're dominated by recreationally important species of finfish, what are we missing? And that's something that concerns me a great deal.
Yeah, it's all interconnected. I'll go back to a number of years ago. We were doing a search for piping plovers,
Yep.
and we found some there on the sandbar, the sand flats inside St. Lucie Inlet. And luckily, one of those birds was tagged, and we ended up tracking back through the tag, and it was a bird that had nested up in the Great Lakes. And quite a few of the population from the Great Lakes does migrate to the east coast of Florida. And so that was interesting to see how it's all interconnected that way. And, it's a small little bird, probably weighs less than a nickel, and yet it migrates thousands of miles every year back and forth.
Yeah. Well, I think, we're seeing some recovery in least terns. I see oyster catchers every once in a while, not many, but they're around.
Yeah, and I don't know if oyster catchers are nesting on Bird Island now or not. I know we thought that they were a couple of years ago, but I haven't been in touch with the FWC about it.
I haven't seen any nesting there. I've seen them on the flats to the east of Bird Island. I think the frigate bird is one of the most majestic and surprising success stories on Bird Island. It's now almost rare not to see frigate birds there.
It is, and it would be a great thing if we could ever document them nesting. We see males, we see
Yep.
females, we see them during the nesting season. But as far as I know, the furthest north that they have nested in recent years is the dry tortugas. So I keep hoping that maybe there are some of those snags on Bird Island that they'll decide to nest there.
Well, the wandering albatross in the Pacific is probably an example of these pelagic birds that, are very picky about their nesting sites.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the closing minutes here, I know you are now, through your role as the Riverkeeper, you're on the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program Board. And so we were pleased to have Kalita Scott as the guest on one of these previous podcasts. And it's good, I think, that they've got those 3 regional coordinators for the NEP. You're on the management board, is that right? Could you say
That's
a few
correct.
words about that?
Yeah, so I had been on the Citizens Advisory Board, but when I took on the role of the Riverkeeper, I actually at that same time was the executive director of the Marine Resources Council as well as being the chairman of the board. It was decided that it would be a good idea for me to be on the management council for the IRL NEP. I think that we are a little closer to the decision-making sort of component of the IRL NEP on the management board. Although I think, I actually miss being on the sort of the lower budget grant process for the Citizens Oversight Committee. I think that the IRL NEP is doing some really good work, and one of the best features of being on the management board is that we get direct sort of reports from the St. John's Water Management District as well as the South Florida Water Management District on habitat health along the lagoon. And I think that we all need to push harder on South Florida Water Management District to do a better job of reporting on health, seagrass, as well as water quality in the southern end of the Indian River Lagoon. The St. John's Water Management District is doing a really good job of recording not only seagrass health, but also its coverage. And I think that we need to, one of the reasons I think that there's a paucity of reported seagrass south of the St. Lucie Inlet is that perhaps it's not being investigated by South Florida Water Management District.
Yeah, could well be. But let's take that back to another function that the MRC provides that I think sort of bridges that gap. But by doing the Lagoon report card.
Yeah.
I have found that very valuable in recent years because it's taking information from both of those sources, but kind of combining them for the entire lagoon.
Yeah, so the Marine Resources Council will, in middle of November, be coming out with its 2025 report. The attempt is to not only do water chemistry analysis, but also to get a little bit more into habitat recovery or health. Eventually, we're looking to get into the tributaries, but water quality is now being reported to the state DEP. And has to go through a very sort of specific process in order to be reported by that agency. And I think that the DEP could do a much better job of reporting out what each basin's water quality is, because it directly relates to the Basin Management Action Plan that is the design to bring us back toward a healthy ecosystem in all of the watersheds in Florida. I am concerned that the BMAP process is so far behind itself in terms of requiring regulatory conformity as well as hitting its marks or its targets, and it really is fractionalized between the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Environmental Protection, and the water management districts in terms of whose authority and whose regulatory responsibility it is to bring compliance in each of those areas. Yeah.
So we're closing in on our time deadline. I know we've had some challenges here with the internet connection, but hopefully Iggy will be able to piece all this together. Is there anything that we haven't gotten to in the discussion that we ought to hit before we close up?
Well, I'd like to say that, the Waterkeepers of Florida, the Waterkeepers Alliance International is about 319 or 17 different organizations. Waterkeepers Florida is 15 different waterkeeper groups. We are sort of the voice for the voiceless. We identify with a water basin or watershed, and we try to keep it drinkable, fishable, and swimmable. And the Indian River Lagoon is one of the fairly complex systems, and I feel grateful to not only live here, to love the watershed, but also to be entrusted with this. We do water quality sampling on a regular basis. I was gifted last year a digital microscope that is connected into a web system with AI that is able to identify different species of bacteria. So I can do a water quality analysis in an area that may have a bacteria bloom, and I can pretty quickly, like within about 30 seconds, determine whether that's going to be toxic or not. It would be great to be able to do more bacterial testing to know what the source of that bacteria is. With some eDNA testing, we could know whether it's bovine or equine or pig or bird or human source of bacteria. So rather than having a sign saying that this is dangerous for human health at the Roosevelt Bridge, we could know whether it's coming from the North Fork or the South Fork or Lake Okeechobee without question. And I think that these are relatively small and, in the grand scheme of things, relatively inexpensive ways to equip the public with knowledge to put the pressure where it belongs on the management and the state legislature to stop doing this. I think that our biggest problem is we have now got a global food system that is adding more and more digestive tracts to a biological area that is unable to handle that kind of nutrient load. And that comes from synthetic fertilizers. It comes from more people. It comes from septic systems that are mid 20th century or some 19th century septic systems. And I don't mean that they were built then, but the technology that they are utilizing is ancient. And we're putting an enormous amount of pressure on these things. I don't think that we've got a solution for a biosolids problem at all. And I think that we've got the alligator Alcatraz as an example of a project that didn't get NEPA approval to be installed, and now we've got an executive order that is going to alleviate any commercial space enterprise from having to do NEPA environmental impact review. What that does to the northern end of the Indian River Lagoon is up for grabs. We've got less and less local control over our land use patterns. And all of these things end up having impact on water quality and habitat health in areas that are as really worth protecting, like the Indian River Lagoon and the American Everglades.
Yeah, well, it certainly shows the need for more education, because you're absolutely right. We need to do a better job at both letting our elected officials know how we feel about these things, and then hoping to make some changes such that our voices are heard. Because in the Treasure Coast, certainly the Indian River Lagoon is the economic driving force, whether it has to
Absolutely.
do with the cost of waterfront property or recreation, fishing, the whole works. So
Yep.
I appreciate you taking the time to help us all understand a little bit more about the challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis. And we certainly wish you the best.
Well, it's been my honor
I'm
and
going
my
to close
pleasure to
by,
speak with you.
okay, great. And we've got a number of future podcasts that we are sort of teeing up. We want to talk with the representative from the Inland Navigation District to help us understand a little bit more about the dredging projects that they do. We also want to talk with the Florida Wildlife Federation. And we've still got Paul Gray, who we've been hoping to get on for a while to talk about Lake Okeechobee. And so keep in tune here. We're going to try to continue to put these podcasts out about every 45 days or so. And most of them will be available either in listen only mode or like this one, listen and watch, where we will run some graphics back in the background. So thank you to our podcast producer, Ignacio Fialas, and Jim. Thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.